Good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Kathleen Mallory, the Planning and Sustainability Manager with the City of Oxnard. And I'm also joined this evening by Heather Davis, who's the lead on the update to the city's Inclusionary Housing Ordinance. The item before you this evening is an implementation of Program 10 from our housing element, which calls for an update to the city's inclusionary housing program. The amendment to the zoning text amendment will happen to Chapter 16 if approved by City Council. And the applicant filing is the Long Range Planning and Sustainability Team with collaboration from the Housing Department. If approved, the draft inclusionary housing ordinance amendments will change the distribution of affordability. And this is a quick summary of the changes that we're proposing within the ordinance before you this evening. First, an increase in the required percentage of affordable housing from 10% to 15%. Second, establishment of a threshold of 6 residential units or more as required to provide, that are required to provide affordable housing or pay the in lieu fee or donate in-kind land for the construction of the building of the housing units. Increasing the term of restriction for an affordable unit from 20 years to 55 years for renters or for rental units. And additionally, changing the current resale restriction on for sale units to an equity share agreement with a 45-year term or restriction. Creation of City Council guidelines for consideration of first proposed off-site inclusionary housing units. And then finally, cleaning up a number of numerous minor changes to ensure the language was consistent. There was clarifications were clear, and that generally making sure that the language read appropriately. So what is an inclusionary housing ordinance, or what is inclusionary housing? That's also known as inclusionary zoning, and it's a policy or regulation that requires private developers to reserve a certain percentage of housing units for very low, or moderate income households in new market rate residential development projects. To ensure long-term affordability, inclusionary programs usually include a minimum number of years that affordable units are restricted as affordable. The duration is dependent upon the project, of the type of project that it is, meaning if it's either a for sale or for rent project. Inclusionary programs often allow developers to incorporate affordable housing into the same development, so it's integrated, or build the units elsewhere, or contribute money or land to the production of affordable housing in lieu of constructing them. Inclusionary housing has been in practice for California and for a number of years since the late 1970s, and over 20% of the jurisdictions in California have adopted inclusionary housing programs to help address affordable housing needs and equitable development goals. And we do have a summary of what is occurring in a number of other communities within the staff report as one of the attachments. In 1999, the city adopted an inclusionary housing ordinance with a policy to establish an affordable housing in lieu fee to facilitate affordable housing unit construction and new units. Since this time, the ordinance has been amended various times to address legal requirements and updates to the city's inclusionary housing fee. The inclusionary housing ordinance was last amended in 2020 to adopt updated in lieu fee requirements. The city's current inclusionary housing ordinance applies to all new residential development containing 10 or more dwelling units and requires 10% of the units be set aside for lower income households. Of that 10%, for rental projects, at least 5% of the dwelling units must be affordable to very low income households, and 5% must be affordable to lower income households. For sale projects, 10% must be affordable to lower income households. And as mentioned, implementation of an update to the inclusionary housing ordinance is reflected in Program 10 of the housing element, the update to the regulations. In November, we went to committee to ask a number of policy questions. And we also conducted some research in terms of changes that needed to happen. The committee agreed with increasing the requirements from 10% to 15%, and then changing the distribution of percentages for new for-sale units. The percentages you can see there on the slide, but 10% for affordable to lower income and 5% affordable to lower income and 10% to moderate. Heather will talk about this further in some follow-up slides. Then additionally, for new rental units, the requirement went from 5% very low and 5% lower income to 5% very low income and 10% lower income. The committee also recommended that the threshold be changed from 10 units in the current ordinance down to 6 units, that we revise the affordable housing cost calculator to be consistent with state density bonus law, and that we continue to require city council approval to pay the in lieu fee versus just allowing the housing director to grant that. Continue to require city council approval to donate land or to produce affordable units off-site. And then also the committee recommended that we bring back the issue of deeper affordability at a later time. So also, since we went to committee, we looked back at the ordinance and we determined, and we also conducted some additional research in what happened in other communities. And we found that we felt there was a need for additional changes to ensure that our housing policy was robust and made sense across different development regulations. The downtown code contains a provision permitting an applicant to receive an additional building height if they enter into a development agreement to provide additional community benefits. One of the qualifying community benefits listed in that code is the contribution of affordable housing at a minimum of 10% of the project units. Provided council approves this draft ordinance, within 6 months, staff will prepare a director's interpretation, which would align the minimum unit percentage to be used in negotiations for affordable housing community benefits to ensure that it's the same as the minimum percentage specified within the inclusionary housing ordinance before you this evening. Additionally, staff updated the in lieu fee calculator in section 16415.9b to exclude affordable units used to calculate state density bonus. That's consistent with an update to the state density bonus law that came effective in 2022. Staff also identified a subset of city documents, largely consisting of city council approved specific plans and development agreements, which will need to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis with regards to applicability of this ordinance. And then lastly, the city attorney's office advised staff to amend the mandatory elements of the local preference that was currently in the in lieu housing ordinance. The current ordinance requires developers to establish and maintain written lists of Oxnard residents qualified to purchase or rent in each of the affordable units, and to give local preference to qualified Oxnard residents on a waiting list. Based upon the recent trends in case law, the city can require that the affordable units be marketed to Oxnard residents as part of the developer's overall marketing plan. The city, however, can only require the affordable units be offered to Oxnard residents first, as a sense of mandatory local preference, and if the city is providing funding for the project or the project is subject to a development agreement. Therefore, we needed to revise that section of the inclusionary housing ordinance to reflect the changes that I just mentioned. This is an overview of the proposed changes, which Heather will go into now. The first off, we'll be adding this ordinance to Chapter 16, which is the zoning ordinance. This will proposed ordinance, if approved by council, will apply to current and future residential development applications with limitations. First, if an application has not been yet deemed complete until approval of the updated inclusionary housing effective date. So applications which have not been deemed complete will be subject to the ordinance. Applications currently on file with the planning division that have not yet been deemed complete, those are different in that an application that hasn't yet come in might be starting in the process and working with planning, but yet may not yet have been formally filed. So that's the distinction. An application which hasn't been submitted as into the city as a formal application, but we're still working through the analysis on it. The second would be if they have, they're currently on file, but they haven't yet been deemed complete. And then, as mentioned, city will evaluate projects for specific plans and development agreements and determine on a case-by-case basis if they are subject to the ordinance. And then the Heather will now go through some of the larger changes to the ordinance, and then there are minor revisions that I mentioned earlier that we will just briefly go over. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Heather.
Thank you, Kathleen. In the next few slides, I'll go over the larger changes to the existing inclusionary housing ordinance, which are reflected in the draft updated inclusionary housing ordinance. As mentioned, these revisions were supported by the committee at their meeting in November. The first large revision is an increase to the required percentage of affordable housing from 10% to 15% for sale and rental development. During the community engagement, there was debate on the 15%, with several in the affordable housing community supporting increased to 20%, and the development community supporting retaining the existing 10%. The proposed 15% reflects a middle ground that maximizes the production of affordable housing without triggering California Assembly Bill 1505. Under AB 1505, if the city requires greater than 15% of new rental units as affordable to lower-income households, the city must submit the ordinance to the California Department of Housing and Community Development for review and provide an economic feasibility study prepared by a qualified entity verifying that the ordinance does not unduly constrain the production of housing at all income levels, including moderate and above moderate. If the feasibility study does not meet HCD's statutory requirement, the city cannot require more than 15%. Next slide, please. This slide breaks down the affordability requirements specifically for sale development. The existing ordinance requires 10% of for sale units to be affordable to lower income households. The proposed ordinance would require 5% to lower income households and 10% to moderate income households. The proposed percentage split was based on the goal for supporting opportunities for lower income households to own a home and also provide opportunities for moderate income households, which is not required under other ordinances. Additionally, the recent construction cost data shows that development of lower income ownership units often costs developers more in land and construction costs than the restricted sale price, resulting in not just a lower profit, but an actual loss to the developer. If costs don't pencil out for developers, the entire project is not constructed, market, or affordable. A calculation of 5% and 10% will result in a fractional number of units under most circumstances. The fraction for each income category will be combined and rounded up to one low-income unit and then one moderate income unit for any remaining fractions. A table outlining the rounding calculation is provided in attachment 4 of the staff report. Next slide. This slide breaks down the affordability requirements specifically for rental development. The existing ordinance requires 5% of units affordable to lower income households and 5% affordable to very low income households. The proposed ordinance would continue to require 5% of units affordable to very low income households, with the balance of inclusionary units, 10%, affordable to lower income households. Similar to the calculation for sale development, the calculation of 5% and 10% would also result in a fractional number of units under most circumstances. Um, the fractions for each income category will be combined and round up to one very low income unit and one low income unit for any remaining fractions. Next slide, please. The proposed ordinance will decrease the applicable development threshold from 10 dwelling units down to 6 dwelling units. The threshold to 6 dwelling units is recommended because the lower threshold would encompass more projects without discouraging small-scale infill development such as ADUs, townhomes, and fourplexes. It is also close to the threshold used by other jurisdictions such as Los Angeles County, Ventura, Goleta, and Fillmore. Staff also recommends 6 dwelling units as the threshold because this number is consistent with the applicability requirement for the attached dwelling unit development standards and the development design review permit in the Oxnard City Code that apply to multifamily residential projects of 6 dwelling units or more. Next slide. The proposed ordinance would increase the deed restriction requirement for new rental development from 20 years to 55 years. This term is consistent with the state density bonus law for rental units and affordable housing and the Affordable Housing and High Roads Job Act, AB 2011. Consistency with state law will provide the development community with unified and consistent expectation in terms of development regulations and predictability. Next slide, please. Another large ordinance change would be a requirement for the for sale affordable units to be restricted under an equity share agreement similar to the requirement of the state density bonus law instead of the existing resale restriction agreement. However, unlike the state density bonus law, the proposed ordinance includes a 45-year term. A resale restriction agreement restricts the controlled sale price at each transaction to ensure the unit remains affordable to an income-qualified buyer for the duration of the term. The resale restriction agreement preserves the long-term affordability of the unit. However, the owner benefits minimally from the equity increase over the time when the unit is resold at a restricted price. Under an equity share agreement, the buyer and the city share the unit appreciation when an affordable for sale unit is sold. The city retains the initial subsidy, while the seller retains any initial down payment made on the unit. An equity share agreement expires at the point of the first resale of a second buyer. Next slide, please. The current ordinance is inconsistent with density bonus law on how affordable housing costs are calculated for rental and for sale units. This creates inconsistencies in implementing affordable housing costs for projects that are subject to inclusionary housing and are requesting state density bonus. The proposed ordinance removes the inconsistency, thereby simplifying implementation. The revised calculation in housing costs will not impact renter or buyer household income eligibility. It would result in reduced rent and cost of affordable units. Next slide, please. The current inclusionary housing ordinance requires that the City Council consider 4 factors before allowing developers to pay an in lieu fee rather than constructing the required affordable units. Consistent with Program 19 of the city's adopted amended 2021 to 2029 housing element, the proposed inclusionary housing ordinance adds a 5th factor for council to consider if development on site will implement affirmatively furthering fair housing, also AFFH. objectives to increase housing mobility opportunities in higher resource areas. Under this revision, if the proposed project is in a higher or moderate resource area, it would be preferable under AFFH to construct the affordable unit on site rather than paying the in lieu fee. Next slide. The current inclusionary housing ordinance requires the City Council's approval for allowing developers to build the required affordable housing units off-site. However, unlike the required in lieu factors, no factors are presently required for allowing off-site development. The proposed inclusionary housing ordinance adds 5 factors for the City Council to consider in determining whether to allow development of required affordable housing units, including compatibility of off-site land use and affirmatively furthering fair housing objectives to increase housing mobility opportunities in high resource areas. Under this revision, off-site development should not be approved if the off-site location is in a lower resource area than the proposed project. Next slide. The proposed inclusionary housing ordinance also includes minor revisions for internal consistency, clarification on requirements, consistency with law, and other minor changes. On the slide is a list of minor revisions. These are also discussed in attachment 5 to the staff report in a little more detail. There's the first revision for internal consistency on unit size and distribution requirements. There's clarification to ensure architectural consistency with market rate units. There's clarification on allowable use of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This is to increase and maintain the supply of affordable housing in the city. So it would include site acquisition, construction, development assistance, rehabilitation to preserve existing affordable housing, subsidies, financing, and administration of the affordable housing programs. Another minor revision is the addition of a provision for the City Council to allow a future city list of qualified applicants. A citywide list, under a citywide list, Oxnard residents in need of affordable housing wouldn't need to search, join, and track multiple developer waiting lists for available affordable units. This revision does not change the current requirement for developers to maintain lists of qualified applicants. Rather, it accommodates future City Council action to allow the Housing Department to maintain a citywide list of qualified applicants without having to amend the Oxnard City Code. Another revision, minor revision, correction of consistency or correction of an inconsistency with the density bonus law. The prior ordinance had restricted including inclusionary units from counting towards state density bonus, which is not permitted. The final minor revision is update to the appeal process to reflect different processes for administrative and discretionary approval. Last slide. The proposed zoning text amendment is consistent with a number of goals and policies included within the 2030 general plan, including diversity of housing, jobs and housing balance, balanced opportunities for housing, local preference, and affordable housing. Program 10 of the amended adopted 2021 housing element identified the existing development threshold of 10 units and the existing inclusionary rental requirement of 5% very low and 5% lower income units. This program also calls for updates to the inclusionary regulations. Following City Council's approval of the inclusionary housing ordinance and with the updated inclusionary housing in lieu fees, Program 10 will be updated to reflect the new threshold and percentage requirements. I now turn the mic back over to Kathleen.
Thank you, Heather. So we just wanted to quickly summarize some of the actions that that took place to secure input on the ordinance. In early 2022, we, the Community Development Department with the Housing Department jointly held 3 public workshops with residents, affordable housing advocates, developers, and we spoke at outreach meetings with the House Farm Workers, Interneighborhood Council Association, or INCO, as well as the West Ventura County Business Alliance, and then also the Ventura County Association of Realtors. We conducted also, in addition to workshops, we had an inclusionary housing website to inform the public regarding the status of upcoming meetings, hearings, posting of videos, as well as presentation materials. And at those meetings, we also did have translation available for the Spanish-speaking community. We also emailed the workshop notices to interested parties. We had a very robust distribution list. And we pulled from our housing element update and those that expressed interest in getting updates regarding the city's work on the ordinance and housing element related items. In January, on January 25th, actually, the city published a draft updated inclusionary housing ordinance, and that draft ordinance received 3 written comment letters, and the summary of the input that we received you could find in your packet as attachment 7. The comment letters were focused primarily on 4 topic areas. The first was the request to increase the inclusionary housing requirements from 10% or from the current, but then beyond the 15% we proposed in that draft, up to 20%. And Heather already spoke about that on slide 7 in terms of the development, in terms of the affordable housing advocates' interest in increasing that percentage to 15%. The development community wanted to keep the percentage at 10%. Additionally, a common thread regarding the 3 written comment letters we received, which is in your packet along with our response to those items, was a request for deeper affordability allowances. And as mentioned earlier in the presentation, due to the extent of that analysis, that matter will be evaluated separately by the committee at a later date. The third item request was to continue to require a resale restriction agreement for for-sale units rather than an equity share agreement. An equity share is the standard affordable housing restriction model utilized for for-sale housing under state density bonus law. The equity share model is recommended because it allows the owner to gain equity over time, which is recognized as a key benefit of home ownership. The city's portion of the equity share funds can be used towards developing or subsidizing new affordable housing units, which can result in more affordable housing, more affordable homes than the original unit. The final item that came out from the 3 comment letters was a request to calculate the required number of affordable units on total market rate units, including the market rate units granted under state density bonus law. The calculation of the number of affordable units on the base, or the base number of units, is a development, which is the total number of units less the density bonus units. And it is consistent with the state density bonus calculations under state density bonus law. Additionally, the existing in-lieu fee was calculated on the base units, not the total. So that summarizes the comment letters we've received that focused on 4 topics, and that is also summarized in attachment 7 within the packet. The update to the ordinance is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act based on 2 provisions and section numbers. The proposed zoning text amendment is a regulatory action that does not increase the quantity or size of future development. An exemption is the appropriate environmental finding for this ordinance action. The next steps regarding this item is that the Commission's recommendation will be forwarded to the City Council for consideration. We envision bringing forward the ordinance update in the spring. Tentatively at this point, it's identified for the council meeting of June 20th. Following City Council adoption of the ordinance, we will initiate a general plan amendment to reflect the increased percentage. We will also continue to, as part of our housing element workshop, which is one of the programs within the housing element, we'll continue on a yearly basis to evaluate success in implementation of that of the updated ordinance. We'll also update the in lieu fee. That study will evaluate the fee calculation and methodology, including housing production trends. We recognize that was a concern or a question from the affordable housing groups, and we will be looking at the methodology as part of that study, and we have communicated that to the affordable housing groups. In the interim, the existing in lieu fee will continue to apply in implementing the new percentage. With that, this evening, staff's recommendation to the Planning Commission is that the Commission open the public hearing and receive public testimony, review and provide comments on the proposed amendments before you this evening, and then adopt a resolution recommending that the City Council repeal the 5 ordinances that you see there and approve the zoning text amendment to Chapter 16 of the Oxnard City Code to require affordable housing in future residential developments of a specific size. This completes staff's presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.